Long viewed as a crossroads of great power competition, Central Asia once again finds itself at the intersection of shifting global alignments. Under Trump's renewed emphasis on American economic and energy interests, US policy towards Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and their neighbors face critical tests. The region's autocratic resilience, dependence on resource exports, and strategic geography, bounded by Russia and China, make it a laboratory for 21st century statecraft. This panel will explore how Washington pursues influence through investment, infrastructure, and energy diplomacy, while countering authoritarian entrenchment and external dominance. How can the US compete for leverage in a space traditionally dominated by Moscow and Beijing? And what does the US approach mean for governance reform and regional connectivity? To help answer these questions, we have a fantastic panel moderated by Sophie Ibbotson. Sophie is a consultant, writer, and researcher who has worked in Central Asia since 2008. She is the former chairman of the RSAA and was a visiting fellow at Oxford University's Changing Character of War Centre, where she researched modelling and forecasting of water-related conflict in Central Asia and Afghanistan. She advises the World Bank and national governments on issues including economic reform and development, tourism and cultural heritage, and communications. And her current research area is policymaking in the Aral Sea Basin from the Wakhan Corridor to Karakal, Pakistan. As with the other two panels today, there will be time for questions at the end, so please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But I shall now hand over to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for the introduction, and to everyone who is joining us today. We've got three fantastic panelists, and I'm going to introduce you to them, and then we will look forward to moving on with the session. So Anette Bohr is an Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, and she has more than 30 years of professional experience as an analyst of Eurasian politics and energy. Her research addresses the politics and international relations of post-Soviet Central Asian states, as well as Russia's relations with China, with a particular focus on governance and regime change in authoritarian states, comparative regionalism, and the geopolitics of energy. Anette is the author or co-author of a number of publications, including the Chatham House reports Turkmenistan, Power, Politics and Petro-Authoritarianism, Myths and Misconceptions in the Debate on Russia, and Kazakhstan, Tested by Transition. Temur Umarov is a fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. His research is focused on Central Asian countries' domestic and foreign policies, as well as China's relations with Russia and Central Asian neighbours. He holds an MA in World Economics from the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing, and is also an alumnus of the Carnegie Xinhua Center's Young Ambassadors and the Carnegie Endowment's Central Asian Futures Programmes. Luca Anceschi is Professor of Eurasian Studies at the University of Glasgow, where he has taught Central Asian Studies since 2013. He previously lectured in international relations at La Trobe University in Melbourne, where he held a Discovery Early Career Fellowship awarded by the Australian Research Council. Luca's research interests can be summarised as the making of foreign policy in post-Soviet Central Asia, the geopolitics of Eurasian energy in the era of climate change, and personalism and personal rule in post-Soviet Central Asia. Annette, would you please start by sharing your thoughts on US policy towards Central Asia from an economic and energy perspective?
Certainly. Well, thank you, Charlie and Sophie. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. So I received the invitation to speak at this conference in May, at a time when no one knew or could have known that the White House would take the decision to convene in Washington, D.C., a C5+1 summit of the presidents of the 5 Central Asian states and Donald Trump on this very day. So it would appear that the conference organizers not only have a great deal of foresight, but might actually even be prescient. So now moving on to my task of giving a quick overview of US policy towards Central Asia from an energy economic perspective. After a long drop in US attention to Central Asia, Trump 2.0 is currently bringing the region back into focus, in large part because of convergent interests in connectivity and critical minerals. So today's summit marks the 10th anniversary of the C+1 regional diplomacy platform that was begun under the Obama administration for the purpose of coordinating Central Asia's relations with the United States. Now, discussions are likely to focus on energy logistics and trade corridors, but with one issue expecting to dominate: critical minerals, of course, which are, as we know, crucial for both cutting-edge technology and advanced weaponry. Now, just to give a little bit of background, the United States Geological Survey lists 54 critical minerals that are defined as non-fuel minerals essential to the economic and national security of the United States. And within this list is a subset of 17 metallic elements that are known as rare earths. And these are used to make magnets, essential for the auto, electronic, and defense industries, as well as in renewable energy. Now, China currently possesses roughly 90% of the world's rare earth elements in mines, around 60 to 70% of them. Now, within this list of critical minerals, Kazakhstan in particular has proven reserves or active production, more importantly, of about half of those identified, such as copper, for which it is the 11th largest producer in the world, and chromium, where it stands as the second largest global producer. And Kazakhstan supplies about 40% of the world's uranium and about 25% of US uranium imports. But Washington doesn't technically classify uranium as a critical mineral, since it can be used as a fuel, which is surprising. But at any rate, most of the region's critical minerals are exported in raw form, often passing through China or Russia for refining. Now, interestingly, Kazakhstan has a newly opened tungsten processing facility in the Almaty region. Tungsten, as you may or may not know, is a critical mineral that is used in the defense industry. Now, this is interesting because the US government is facilitating a bid by a private American company for tungsten deposits in Kazakhstan in competition with Chinese bidders, even though China accounts for 4/5 of the global tungsten production. So now returning to today's summit, from the point of view of Washington, it's an opportunity to gain greater access to critical minerals, including rare earths, in order to ultimately lessen reliance on China, while strengthening trans-Eurasian roots and reinforcing the sovereignty of the Central Asian states in the process. Central Asian states, for their part, are hoping that the summit will lead to greater economic diversification beyond hydrocarbons. They're also looking for technology transfer and local capacity building, and not least, a means to balance their relations with China, Russia, and the US a bit more equally. Now, naturally, there are obstacles. First, we can expect potential pushback from Russia and China if cooperation with the US actually moves forward, particularly into dual-use technology partnerships or things like geospatial surveying. But really, this leads me to the second obstacle, which is really the main challenge. And that is actually converting declarations that are bound to be made into actual tangible progress. Let's not forget that the US has consistently declared interest in developing critical minerals in partnership with Central Asia. This is by far not the first occasion, but very few concrete steps have been taken, and this is really quite a familiar pattern. Now, the Central Asian states welcome US engagement, but they want more than just investment capital. They also want technology acquisition, domestic processing capabilities, and access to markets. In other words, they want to build midstream capacity, which means refining and processing rather than just upstream mining, so that they are not merely raw material exporters. And this would involve implementing a strategy that combines finance, production, processing in Central Asia itself, and transport corridors as a single integrated strategy. Now, obviously, this is and always has been harder for the US to achieve than for Chinese and Russian state companies. And we've seen this in many an occasion in many different spheres. But it should be mentioned, however, that the US International Development and Financial Corporation has said it is ready to co-finance midstream mining and processing projects across Central Asia, while the US Export-Import Bank can cover long-term debt. So basically, we need to watch and see if Trump will have a particular fire into his bum, and actually we will see some progress here, but it's by far not a certainty. A third obstacle, and this will be my final point, is Central Asia's ability to trade with the US is constrained by inadequate transport infrastructure. Now, the US would also like to have market access to the energy resources of the region while bypassing both Iran and Russia. But the middle corridor, which we've been hearing so much about, which is a multimodal transport corridor linking China to Europe through Central Asia and the Caspian, it has its own set of problems. And while it may have doubled its cargo volumes over the last few years, it's still far from approaching the capacity offered by the traditional northern route that goes through Russia. And I'd just like to mention here a lesser known point, and that is that additionally, Russia is promoting the international north-south transit corridor, whose eastern branch roughly overlaps with the Kazakhstan-Turkmenistan-Iranian route, that is the shortest for commodity transportation between Eurasian Union countries and South Asia and the Middle East. And this makes the development of the middle corridor a double-edged sword, insofar as it can benefit Russia and a number of other countries as well. So middle corridor countries are discussing the possibility of developing new transit routes, such as an Uzbekistan-Turkmenistan route, with a second one linking it to Tehran. Now, not only would the combination of possible routes offer Iran an economic lifeline, it could also give China the possibility to expand its trade footprint in the Middle East and possibly even cement its bond with Iran. So these are just a few of the obstacles here. But I'll end my remarks here, and I'm very happy to take any questions. I think I've already gone over my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I've already got questions on that, but I want to hear from the other panelists first before we start talking on that topic. Temur, can I ask you, please, to comment on the US's competition for influence with Russia and with China in Central Asia?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with great speakers. Indeed, what's happening right now can be perceived as the US come back to Central Asia. And of course, there's a lot of symbolism at the moment. It's 10 years anniversary of C5+1, and President Trump has invited everybody to Washington, D.C. For some of the presidents, this is the first time ever they're visiting the US Capitol as presidents of their countries. And this is the first time ever C5+1 takes this looks as a high-level meeting in the Capitol specifically made for that. But many skeptics would say that this symbolism doesn't really transform into reality, and it's not giving a lot of instruments in the hands of Central Asian leaders to use in their own foreign policy. However, here I should say that geopolitics is contains from a lot of symbols. And in this regard, it's very important that Central Asian countries are getting so much attention right now from President Trump. From the point of view of Central Asian political regimes, it gives them more weight in their conversations with their allies, and at the same time main strategic brackets that they exist in, I mean, Russia and China. And from that point of view, all 5 Central Asian countries are really happy with what is happening right now with their relationship with the US, because previously, I should say that even before Donald Trump, the Biden administration has taken a much more pragmatic approach to Central Asia. However, the amount of trust wasn't there, because when Biden was on the one hand giving much more attention to the leaders, inviting them to the meeting in New York, and really trying to find new pragmatic middle ground where they can cooperate, and not really pushing them to be anti-Russia or anti-China, but they couldn't trust the Biden administration, because at the same time, there was this existence of the second America in the phase of USAID, NAD, the Voice of America, Radio Free Liberty, everything that collectively can be called this heritage from the Cold War era was present there. And for Central Asian political regimes, it was difficult to differentiate what is the real America. And now Trump comes without this heritage, without this baggage, which looks much more comfortable for Central Asian leaders. And from that point of view, they are hoping that it will give them more opportunities to cooperate really and to transform this attention that Trump's administration is paying to Central Asian countries into something tangible, which eventually will make America be more present in the region, and which in turn will bring more influence of the United States to the region that can be then used to counterbalance some of the particular parts of Russia and Chinese presence in the region. However, I think that in this puzzle, there are many unknowns and there are many unpredictabilities. Of course, there are a lot of economic perspectives, as Annette greatly outlined, but they really require a lot of investment. And when it comes to investment, the problem is not that Central Asian leaders do not want or cannot provide, special invitation to specific investors from the US. The problem is in the systems of how Central Asian economies and politics work, and the lack of guarantees that international investors can have on the ground in Central Asia. So we can end up in a situation when Central Asian countries will have high hopes from the Trump administration, but eventually it will not lead to any particular real change on the ground. I will stop here and happy to answer any of the questions.
Thank you. Luca, how would you say that the US foreign policy deals with autocracy in the region, both at a regional level and with the individual states in Central Asia?
Well, if I were to have a slogan about what's going on in this particular area, I would say America first, human rights never. So my assessment of what's going on in the political dimension of the relationship between this White House and Central Asia, it's quite negative. Because what we're seeing, today's meeting happens at the confluence of two processes. On the one hand, we have a region where authoritarian governance has never been as strong as it is today. We now have 5 regimes that have got very authoritarian, often personalist tendencies, but also we have the grip of these people onto the politics of the region can be lasting forever. I mean, the wave of succession arrangements, constitutional referenda, which we saw in Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan in 22-24, entrenched those regimes well into next decade and even to the 2040s. So also the pandemic did really contribute to shrink even more the political space of Central Asia. So on the one hand, we have this region which has become more authoritarian than it used to be. On the other hand, we have a partner, that is the United States, that has engaged in a value-free foreign policy. So we hear from this what the White House is saying, this is a transactional foreign policy, that the American interests are what comes before any kind of value, which actually makes this White House probably the easiest partner for Central Asia in the long run of US regional relationship. So in this sense, what I mean to say is that you're not going to have the US pressing for any kind of political liberalization, human rights, laws, any kind of good governance promotion in that sense, which really diminish the regional role of the US. I mean, when I was doing research last in the region, we ended up talking with some of my friends about what the US did in the 1990s, and they were very popular in Central Asia because they were pushing for the reforms that were necessary to de-Sovietize the politics. So, political party, constitutions, values, rights, and all of this is gone now. So in that sense, you're going to see the US having the kind of role vis-a-vis democratization and good governance that the Russia and China do really have. So it's a transformation in that sense of their relationship. And to my mind, the transactionality of US foreign policy is an accelerator for Central Asia authoritarianism. You're going to see more and more of the rhetoric that we see coming from the states happening in Central Asia. And we saw it fairly clearly in Kazakhstan, where we had the president of Kazakhstan, Tokayev, talking in very MAGA-like terms about climate change. And we also hear him making comments about how good is the demise of US aid because they will not have to deal with LGBT rights anymore. So this will never happen, 10, 15 years ago. These are conservative societies where there is a premium put on hydrocarbons, but you will never have those kind of comments made by a local leader because the international consensus on those issues were somewhat different. So to my mind, having Tokayev that adopting that kind of rhetoric clearly shows that they cotton on the field and they realize that really we do have a very changed international environment, a very changed international situation where the disaggregation or the order brings those value in this repair, which means that now they can say, they can have this kind of rhetoric. So to my mind, you're gonna possibly have, in terms of optics, you're gonna see a closer relationship because Trump understands, at least he says he does, strongmen. Also, the Central Asian leaders do understand the importance of sycophancy and ingratiation because they do that themselves when they are at home. So you're going to see a lot of that kind of rhetoric being replicated in whatever summit you're going to see today. I mean, really, and in the next few years, if the US has got the political consistency to keep on going. Long-term prospects, however, are not very positive because on the one hand, I struggle to see this White House having foreign policy consistency in the long term and engaging regionally with the same intensity that Russia and China have had for a long, long time. But also pushing less for rights, pushing less for democratization is going to make the region more unstable. I mean, we saw it in Kazakhstan. These regimes in 2022, these regimes are stable until they're not. And the further hardening of domestic politics, the progressive shrinking of the political space are all elements that could work in the short term, but in the medium to the long run, you will see this kind of lack of accountability, this lack of political rights, this poor governance being perpetrated, as something that makes these regimes less stable. So to my mind, the US position, doesn't make sense in the longer run. Someone could argue that what we're seeing now is the end of Central Asia as being treated as an appendix to Afghanistan, which is what, has been a big problem for US policy in the region for a long time. But at least if I believe, I'll go back to what Annette was saying before about this emphasis on the critical materials, it seemed to me that now Central Asia is just a way to counterbalance China, on the global level. And this is the same thing, just in a different way. So I don't really think that there is a US foreign policy interest in the region well framed. I don't think they have much of a long-term plan. And I think that in the long run, it's going to be a problem for the local regimes, not for their stability, but for the population, certainly, because the transactionality actually makes this kind of relationship, the people-to-people side would be very much downplayed. I'm not sure, what kind of visa option the Central Asia can get when it comes to go to the US. Education opportunities are going to be reduced. So you're going to have the US oligarchy that supports Trump dealing with the local regimes, which are oligarchic and kleptocratic to see. So I'm sorry it's not a positive image that I'm playing, but that's what I think.
Thank you. And actually, I think one of the important things actually is in this session that we don't have to be positive about it. We can be critical if we want to be, we can be observant, because it is a very, very complex situation, and a lot of the political discussion that is happening around Central Asia is with a very positive spin on it, for a variety of reasons, and actually being able to interrogate some of the underlying issues is very, very important. Annette, both you and Luca mentioned about the critical minerals being really a central issue to why the relationship has changed, and there seems to be a sort of an uptick in the engagement. I was thinking about the Middle Corridor, and you mentioned some of the regional infrastructure developments as well. I'm very interested in the north-south routes and how ideally Afghanistan would fit into that picture with the train developments linking down to Pakistan and Iran. What appetite do you think the US has to support, or at least not block, such expansions of regional infrastructure when they require the engagement and even partnership with countries like Iran and Afghanistan, which have an even more difficult relationship with the US? Is the US willing to accept their engagement because they are in the interest of Central Asia, or is involving those partners as well going to antagonize the relationship and make it less likely that those projects would be delivered?
Yeah, just first a comment about the critical minerals. I mean, you can just see what's happening in that summit today. You know, and if I were asked to place a bet, would Trump confuse the leader of Tajikistan with the leader of Kyrgyzstan? I would say the probability is higher than 80%. And my point here is that basically it means that it's easier in a way for the Central Asian leaders to deal with Trump. They can make proclamations that don't have to be based on truth. They can really not worry about all of the traditional baggage that they had to worry about in times past. And I just think that here, you know, we see that Trump has completed a tour where he's made deals with Thailand, with Vietnam, with Australia. So we don't know how Central Asia is going to fit in here, but Trump is absolutely very keen on decreasing the reliance of the United States on China. Particularly, China has begun to weaponize critical materials. So I think that there is perhaps a possibility that things will come into play, like I said before, the Export-Import Bank, which would be very crucial, and the Development and Finance Corporation, which, you know, would give it those sort of tools that could make something actually go off, rather make progress where it hasn't before. Now, in terms of the Middle Corridor, we see that the route is already, the north-south route is already in play. I mean, we saw 2 years ago the first railroad delivery go from St. Petersburg actually to the Iranian port of Chabahar. So this actually is in existence. And it's just something that people don't tend to think about when they think about China and Russia financing. So China financing the Middle Corridor. Well, this also gives it the ability to use these routes for other purposes, in particular, so far as it intersects with the north-south transit corridor. China has invested about $4 billion in Iran and is quite reliant on supplies of Iranian oil. So we could see in the future these routes being used to actually strengthen China's relations with Iran. And so in other words, Europe can't just isolate the benefits of the Middle Corridor. Other countries will invariably benefit from the infrastructure associated with it. And right now, if we go back to the Samarkand summit, the European 5+1 that took place in April, we've yet to see any of that 12 billion euros. We don't actually know where it's going to go precisely. We simply know that it's been sort of vaguely pledged. So really, I just can't emphasize enough that we have to see how these developments are going to pan out. But with this one particular area of critical minerals, and insofar as Trump sees it as crucial for decreasing over-reliance on China, it is an interesting one to watch.
Thank you. And that point about the commitments which are made were not necessarily a follow-through is a very interesting one. This is something that I sort of move on to, and particularly to ask Luca and Temur, although if Annette you want to come in on it as well, it'd be quite interesting. Bearing in mind the combination of US aid cuts, the poorly managed withdrawal from Afghanistan, the inconsistency of US military commitments to Ukraine and other partners, do you think that the Central Asian governments still view the USA as a reliable partner, economically, politically, or is the unpredictability of the policies that they're making something that they will view warily in terms of their broader strategy?
Well, they are a relevant partner to start with. I mean, this is really post-US Central Asia, it's post-American Eurasia. So after Afghanistan, we don't. I mean, I don't even mention the US when I teach my course in Central Asia politics. It's really irrelevant from where I stand. I think that you're gonna this kind of the meetings that summit we're seeing today in Washington, it is something that is gonna work very much as a great photo opportunity for the leaders' and legitimacy building. But I don't think that they do count. Well, they would be foolish if they will count on something consistent to be emanated by the Trump administration, which is very well known to be a very vague policy entity in that sense. So no, I mean, I think that also this idea that everything can be fixed in this C5 plus, like we saw in Europe, China, even Italy has got one. Everyone needs to have one auto setting. It seemed to me quite puzzling as a choice. But going back to your question, Sophie, I don't really think that there is much policy being discussed today. I think it's an opportunity for everyone to advertise different kind of signal, different kind of agendas. The Central Asia, they accepted by was supposedly the most powerful one on earth. Trump by saying we're going there because we want to make deals on the minerals, which is an anti-China move. But I don't think that what we're going to see is the kind of structured, coherent, and effective policy that we saw, for instance, China doing with the region. So my answer to your question is basically no.
Temur, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Luca has said, and also will add that, it's striking me that after 3 decades of being independent, Central Asian leaders still hope to get this acceptance from the big guys sitting in the White House, and this is one of the most important sources of being perceived as a real important figure in both world politics, but also in domestic politics, and that's why we've seen how all 5 Central Asian leaders, especially leaders of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, has been running to get as much of attention of Donald Trump as they can, because for them this is an important proof that they matter. Again, I will come back to my take about the symbolism, and symbolism matters in multilateral foreign policy. And of course, the great photos that we'll be taking today will add a lot of political weight to Central Asian leaders in their negotiations with Russia and China. So I think they'll try to make as good of appearance as they can from those hours that they will have with Donald Trump.
So would you say actually that the C5+1 event is as much about domestic policy and domestic perception as it is about genuine, tangible foreign activity and engagement?
I would agree with both. From foreign policy, I mean, this is a very comfortable platform that any country can use. Again, with years, it actually makes more sense considering that now Central Asian countries get along with each other. They have a clear vision that they better stick together, and together they can attract more attention and potentially more investment. So it makes sense for C5+1 to exist as an important platform internationally, but for domestic audience, I mean, just the fact that they are in Washington, D.C. matters a lot because, you know, those political leaders look as important guys among the political elites at home, and this is very important for their image.
We've been talking really so far about the Central Asian republics collectively, but there is significant differences economically and politically between the capacity of the different states. Do you think that there are particular countries which have got more to gain from this particular event, or is it really about the collective benefits?
We clearly see that much more attention is being paid to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And this is not, you know, a secret that those countries have more to put on the table. And they have been much more active in their diplomacy. And the fact that President of Uzbekistan, Mirziyoyev, has been able to have a in-person 5-minute meeting with Donald Trump in New York prior to today's meeting tells a lot about how you know, Tashkent is putting a lot of effort to make this happen, and Kazakhstan also is doing the same. So from that point of view, I think it's clear that those two countries stand out, but other three. You know, they first of all understand that it's not a competition, but rather this is something that is also very important for them. The fact that the West collectively, or the US in particular, pays much more attention to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan plays in their hands as well, because they get additional attention, and they also use you know, the C5+1 not only for their own kind of benefits, but also collectively, because this is something that has become intertwined. But eventually, I think that other countries don't perceive it as a competition, but rather take it and try to use it as you know, as effectively as they can.
Thank you, Luca. Or Annette, do you want to come in?
Well, I would very much agree with what Temur says here. I don't think that there's much of that competitive element in this respect. I mean, what we're seeing is the Central Asian states becoming regional actors in their own right in a way that they simply were not before. And whether or not anything comes out of the critical minerals aspect, and it might well do. I mean, at this very moment, we see gallium being extracted from Uzbekistan, which is something that Trump just made a big deal about in Australia. I mean, there are there are really a lot of factors here that we have to consider before we think that something might come of it. But that aside, these sort of summits are a way for them to increase their agency. And it's not simply by having good relations with Russia, with China, the EU, the Middle East, Turkey, and the United States. But it's also by defending their own interests within those relationships, even when it means saying no when necessary, right? and it's about standing up for their own interests. And I think that that's something that they will find, as I said before, easier to do with Donald Trump. I mean, there's that element of surprise. It's kind of like walking a plank into the unknown, and on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's a definite advantage to it. So at any rate, these middle power countries, such as Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, far more than the other three, have far more agency now than they did during the first Cold War. There's now much greater diffusion of power in the world in general. It's not just concentrated politically within NATO and the Warsaw Pact. We see that influential voices can come from a number of places, and we never can be sure where those places will be. So within that sort of general picture, meetings like this with Trump, it can really have, I think, more of a foreign policy benefit than a domestic one, although, it certainly doesn't hurt at home either.
Moving on and sort of looking a bit more at that issue of self-interest, the US recently announced new sanctions against Russia, which also are impacting the banks in particularly Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and then by extension the regional businesses who depend on them. We heard Kyrgyzstan's President Japarov call for Western leaders to stop politicising the economy at the UN General Assembly. Is he justified in this criticism? And are there any ways in which the US can better target its sanctions to exert pressure on Russia, but without causing this sort of collateral damage economically and politically in Central Asia? Perhaps, Luca, you could start on that?
Yeah, I mean, the sanction aspect of all of this is very interesting, because we don't, I mean, I'm yet to understand fully what Trump really means with the sanction he's going to impose on Russia, or it's already imposed them. How long is it going to stay? Are they going to monitor them? We know that with the prior administration, we got to the point in which secondary sanctions were imposed on Kazakhstani companies. They were trading actually weaponry for the Russian economy. But the problem with the imposition of sanctions is that you need consistency over a war that is dragging on, which means that you need, as a sanction enforcer or a sponsor of sanctions, you need to have the policy focus, which seems to me is quite lacking when it comes to these White House. I mean, the Europeans, who have got somewhat stronger consensus on that, are still failing to enforce them. But again, you see someone like Japarov, who is a minor actor, in all of these, feeling entitled enough to make a point about, this is not working. Why are you doing that? Which means two things. One is that he perceives that the order, the Western-led order, is disappearing. So in this kind of change of order, they bat for whatever team works better for them in that sense. But second, also that they do have an ambivalent attitude towards Russia and the sanctions. So there has been a lot of sanction busting and a lot of trade going on, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan particularly. So I wouldn't be really surprised if, when we see the numbers, finally someone does serious research on this, we get to see the numbers, and we see that they have been a vehicle for the import of goods and under sanction. I am not really sure. I mean, I tend not to look at this White House very seriously. I don't know whether you have really catched on that. So to me, when they make a statement, I want to see how they work 3 months later. And the statement on sanction has been unprepared, done off the cuff, and I haven't really seen the structures that need to be put in place to follow up on that statement. And I want to make just one more point about the issue that you were discussing before, because, rightly so, the attention went to the big two, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But try to put yourself into the shoes of one of the presidents of Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, or Kyrgyzstan. What do they need to? I mean, what are they going to get today? I mean, they don't have that much power in terms of critical minerals, or they're certainly not developed. So for them, it's just a domestic policy occasion. I think that this is something which we're going to see very much on the papers in Turkmenistan, particularly tomorrow on the telly, in which the president was at the White House, because particularly since there is not a whole US holistic approach the player. It's very much ad hoc, focused on areas which the president thinks are relevant. The approach to the five cannot be individualized as it should have been, which means that they are doing the same mistake the Europeans have done for 20 years in that sense. And to my mind, this is something which plays directly in the card of those minor players who are gonna do exactly what Temur was saying before, having the big photo opportunity at the White House, which is gonna be plastered all around the countries tomorrow and the days to come.
Thank you. Temur, Anette, is there anything that you'd like to add into that?
Well, with regard to the sanctions evasion question, Central Asia has become very good at playing both sides. It tells each side what it wants to hear. So it will tell the European Union, well, you just have no idea the pressure we're under with Russia. We simply have to oblige. And it might tell Russia, well, my goodness, we'll be hit with these secondary sanctions that will destroy our economy. Now, it seems to me that this game is getting, just a little bit old, and the EU is catching on to a certain degree. I mean, perhaps they've always caught on more than we give them credit for, but they are, on the other hand, loath to actually pressure, because actually with secondary sanctions, it ends up creating a lot of resentment and backlash, actually, towards the country that's implementing them, which is something they'd like to avoid. On the other hand, what was the report that came out a few days ago? We saw $500 million going from South Korea through Kyrgyzstan, pretty much directly to Russia. So, the practice is certainly is certainly continuing.
And I will just add one point, if I may. I do agree with what Annette and Luca has said already, but also I think what Central Asian leaders might have right now in their minds probably is that Trump administration is so different from the Biden administration, and that they can get away with so much of things that they couldn't with Biden because of the particular interest of that administration to the sanctions question. But actually, this is not the case. There's much more continuity in the foreign policy. And we've seen actually how Trump has tried to so-called solve the Ukraine war, but turns out the originality of his approach wasn't really successful. That's why he actually came back to the same old tactics that were there during Biden administration. So I think what might happen with Central Asian sanctions is actually the same, and the illusions that Trump is so much different and he's business oriented and he's pragmatic and he will not be paying attention to some of the details is just not there.
But nonetheless, when all is said and done, we still only have about 30 to 40 entities, including banks, that are sanctioned in Central Asia. It's not much.
We've got a few questions in the webinar chat from the audience, and a couple of them relate to Turkey, which is not something really we've discussed this afternoon. Just to sort of bring them together, I'd like to hear from the panel on the role of Turkey and the Turkic Council, and also whether the US is in competition with Turkey for influence in the region.
Okay, I can start. I think that Turkey stands out from many different actors in Central Asia because it's been perceived mainly by Russia not as a real threat, but rather as this country that is in shades of gray. It's not black, it's not white. It's somehow friendly, but at the same time, Russia should be cautious about it, and that's why Central Asian leaders don't really see a lot of danger in letting Turkey into even sensitive parts of cooperation. But at the same time, the initiative that Erdogan has taken in its foreign policy and this approach of coming back to Central Asia, because Turkey is not, a new actor. It has been there since the 90s, but it had many obstacles on its way. And now, with his comeback, I think the approach to Central Asia is much more effective than it was. Turkey is not so much paying attention on the ideas of pan-Turkism and creating this world where it will be a leader, at least on the rhetoric. Ankara is putting a lot of focus on perceiving everybody as equally and letting everybody speak out in the Organization of Turkic States. And the new aspect of cooperation, and I think here Luca might have his opinion, is of course the authoritarian part of it. Turkey is becoming more authoritarian. Central Asian countries really love to have inspiration from many different political regimes of how they are combining different approaches of control over the society, but also having economic development. And Turkey here might be a great example, considering many similarities to the cultural and societal aspects of Central Asia.
I don't see Turkey as competition for the United States in Central Asia. Turkey is, this would be a subject for another conference that focuses more on Russia. And we certainly see this in the Caucasus, where the shifting positions of the states there have changed towards Russia and are able to do so in large part because of Turkey and its influence in the region. But for Central Asia, Turkey is a very important player. It's another important player in the web. And again, just to repeat what I said before, it's not simply about having good relations with all of these powers. It's about when you say no, when you say yes. It's about creating that intricate network, those webs of relations that ultimately build on itself to give you more agency, to give you more power. And within that, Turkey plays a very fundamental role. I would say that it's really, this is a power that knows the Central Asian states much better than the United States does, really has an idea of what they're about, some sort of history with them that the United States simply does not.
Luca?
No, I agree with both comments on Turkey. Just pick up on one point that Temur made before. Cooperation with authoritarian states, authoritarian-leaning states, is something that it's very comfortable for Central Asia, because it comes, of course, with no price tag, comes with no conditionality, but it also comes with the opportunity to import non-democratic strategies of power maintenance from other states. So, that's why this particular Turkey administration, which is personalist, kleptocratic, and all the kind of things that come with the advancement of authoritarianism, it's particularly influential for Central Asia. And I agree with what Annette says. They have an idea, they have a plan of what's going on, unlike other partners.
Thank you. And there's one last question. I know we're running out of time, but one of the other questions I'd like to pull from the audience chat is about the level of coordination that you think will have happened between the Central Asian countries ahead of the C5+1. Have they met separately and agreed a common strategy or common messaging on particular issues, or will it be a bit more ad hoc on the day?
I would be surprised if they did it, but I have a particular vision of regional integration and regional multilateralism, which may be outdated, but is certainly not been questioned by facts, just by opinion. So to my mind, no. The Central Asians are exceptionally good at framing individual responses to collective challenges. So I would be surprised if they did coordinate, but I would be very happy to be proven wrong by that. Also, it seemed to me that, unless, something went, like behind the scenes, this was a fairly recently called meeting. There wasn't a long planning. Some point, I even heard they weren't going to have it. So I would be surprised if there were coordination. Also, can they contribute to agenda framing with that kind of White House that they have over there? I am not sure. But again, I could be wrong, and I would be very happy to be proven wrong on this.
Temur, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with Luca. There is no, clear messaging that was happening prior to that. And actually, the consultative meeting between Central Asian leaders is planned to take place on the 16th of November. So I think they will have a chance to discuss it maybe in a week after this meeting. But I know that on the bureaucratic level, some of the MFAs of Central Asian countries have been having those kinds of conversations prior to big meetings with Russian colleagues or Chinese, but it's not happening on the level of the leadership. It's not happening in a way that all five presidents will meet and then go to one of the big capitals to discuss something unilaterally. It's not, the level of cooperation is just not there, and they have their own agenda, but for now, most of this agenda overlaps and can coexist.
Thank you. That has been Annette.
Well, I would just add that the meeting was called at very short notice, rather this summit, in light of events that took place between China and America at the highest level. So what probably happened is you would not have seen any coordination at the highest levels, but perhaps those ministers who are tasked with regional cooperation, might have sent some messages back and forth, something along the lines of, well, let's make sure we go for midstream processing and not just raw material, something that is rather superficial. And I think Temur is right that this will play out with time, really, and we'll see what comes of it.
I'm hugely grateful to all of you for your time and your insights today, and to the RSAA for giving us a platform for this discussion. I do often feel that sort of Central Asia takes back seat in discussions of this kind, and so to have a full session purely to focus on Central Asia and its engagement with the US and the wider world is really, really valuable. So thank you to Charlie for facilitating, and thank you to the RSAA for having us, and to, of course, the audience for participating and for the excellent questions that you put in the chat box as well.